Hello everybody! Before we get into this review, I want to take a quick second to thank our sponsor for this video. No, I'm not even close to that level yet. What I actually want to do is thank you all for the support you gave my top 10 most wanted death battles video. It was my first real attempt at making long-form versus content on YouTube, and I was really happy with how it turned out, so it was really encouraging to get so much positive reception on it. Even if you just left a comment with a list of your own most wanted episodes, I appreciate your self-serving contribution to my place in the YouTube algorithm. With all that out of the way, let's get started, shall we? Ant-Man vs. Atom is the first episode of Death Battle's 10th season, and goddamn, for one of the Marvel vs. DC matches I expected the least from, this blew those expectations out of the water. I was already looking forward to the analyses since it was my good friend DJ Tiki's first outing as an editor for Death Battle, but I really underestimated how much I would end up enjoying the animation. Because compared to last season's sprite fights, I would only put this behind Black Adam vs. Apocalypse and Trunks vs. Silver in terms of sheer spectacle. Let's not put the ant before the man, though. First, let's cover the analyses, where I really don't have much to say that isn't positive. I guess I'll start with what I mentioned before. The editing is really good. DJ did a great job at bringing the comic panels to life, and while you can see the differences in his style of editing compared to Gerardo and Nick's work for the show, I would say that this meets the bar set by their prior showings. If this is the level of editing we can expect for the rest of the season, I'd say we're in very good hands with DJ at the reins. I also liked the script for both analyses, though I did enjoy Ant-Man's a fair bit more than Atom's. The Ant trivia made Hank's rundown feel unique compared to other Marvel heavy hitters, and I enjoyed hearing about his character arc over his history as a hero. Ray's felt more like a basic rundown in comparison, so I wasn't quite as engaged, but it was still decent. I thought the cutaways for both were also good, though I guess that makes sense since the cutaways in this episode are all in service of Broomstick giving Wiz a mental breakdown with pizza science. Ben really sells Wiz's desperation as the bit goes on with some great line deliveries. And of course, Chad does a great job voicing Boomstick, as always. This is probably way more meta than they were intending with the joke, but I felt a sort of who inflates the Batmobile's tires vibe from Boomstick's comically simple understanding of their shrinking powers. Which I appreciated since actually breaking down how they work would have definitely thrown off the pacing of the script and I would not have been interested. Now, before we get to the fight, I want to touch on the fact that there isn't a single calc to be found in this episode. Not in either analysis, nor in the conclusion. I didn't mind it since it left more room in the script for the unique stuff, but it did make the conclusion feel like it was lacking in some context. The black boxes have to do a lot of heavy lifting in that regard, even in areas they normally don't have to, like the speed comparison. Some of them disappear really quickly too, and I had to jump back and pause to be able to read them sometimes. Having gone through similar production cycles for versus shows myself, I know they did all the stat triangle stuff behind the scenes and focused more on the factors unique to Pym and Palmer. I can appreciate that, given how stale the big feats for repeating franchises like Marvel and DC can feel when they're brought back up for the umpteenth time. But I would have liked at least a passing mention of what made Hank stronger and tougher, like how Magneto vs. Tetsuo got it out of the way before turning to the interesting factors. Now, that all might sound pretty negative, but those were my biggest criticisms of the episode as a whole, which should really put into perspective how much I like everything else. Speaking of which, we can finally get to the animation, and holy shit is it great! The setup wastes no time in establishing the characters of Pym and Palmer, which I love. Hank is more bored than anything by this random costumed intruder in his lab, and Ray is fascinated by the science of the Pym particles, which felt in line with how he was portrayed to be naturally curious and scientific in his analysis. Both of these performances are nailed by their voice actors, with Chris Okawa suiting Atom quite well, and Gavin Hammond selling Ant-Man's self-assured confidence perfectly. Then the fighting starts in earnest, and right off the bat, I really enjoyed how they used the environment to juxtapose the scale of their attacks with the actual scale of the lab. The use of the drinking bird and the Newton's cradle were very funny, even if Ant-Man's reaction to the former is a little overblown since he could just roll out of the way instead of doing his best Darth Vader impression first. The dialogue continues to impress as well, selling the ridiculous smarts by having Hank deduce the source of Ray's powers already, and Adam basically responding with, "Yeah, I recognize the potential in what was already there instead of inventing something and naming it after myself like a stuck-up asshole." They scuffle for a bit longer before we get to the first use of the ants, where you can already see part of the conclusion coming into play. Adam uses his sword and condensed mass to overpower the individual ants, only to get overwhelmed when they swarm him and he has to grow to squish them underfoot. I really appreciate when Death Battle's animations naturally incorporate the finer details of their results. It makes these episodes feel very cohesive as complete packages. We see more of that when Adam no-sells the Pym particles, only for Hank to turn them on the car Ray brought in to force him to shrink down. From there, we get one of the funniest uses of a "how do you do, fellow kids" line in recent memory, which also legitimately makes sense since, yeah, the ants probably do see Hank as their queen. No time to think about the implications of that though, since Adam takes out Ant-Man's gun in a cool allusion to a feat they brought up in his analysis. I like that, though I'm a little confused if Ant-Man is meant to be shrinking down to Adam's level here, or if he's being shrunk down by Adam messing with his gun somehow. I'm pretty sure it's meant to be the former, but given how Hank barely reacts to his gun exploding in his hand, I found it a little confusing on my first watch. Now we're in the microverse, and as a quick aside, I like the use of the MCU-esque location splashes for when we enter these external realms during the fight. It makes it feel oddly cinematic with how they sync up with the music, which, by the way, Not Actual Size is a really solid track. It's fun and triumphant to start, but gets dramatic and imposing once things start getting extra-dimensional, which is where things start to turn against Adam. He reaches his growth limit in the microverse, giving Ant-Man the opportunity to break his biobelt with his ants. And now that his size can be manipulated by others, Hank makes him grow alongside him and drags him into overspace. I could go on for a while about how excellent the sound design on Hank's echoing voice is here, which fits in with the already great sound effects through the rest of the fight. But I really want to point out the small touches here. When Adam is pressuring Hank and takes the fight to a small scale, it goes to the microverse instead of the underspace. But when Ant-Man makes Adam grow, they travel to overspace instead of whatever the DC equivalent would be, I don't know. They don't even mention there being one in the analysis, so I don't actually know if there is one, but whatever. It's a subtle way of showing who has the advantage at the points where they shift locations, which is such a smart use of Marvel and DC's differing size realms. It also gives us this amazing hand-drawn shot of Eternity, a visual treat that is immediately upstaged by the death. This is the crowning jewel of the fight to me, and it shouldn't be hard to see why. The sheer agony depicted in Adam's eyes as he feels the ants literally ripping their way out of his body is just horrifying. And that's just the start of one of the most viscerally uncomfortable kills in death battle history. The way Palmer's face goes limp when the ants first emerge is haunting, and his screaming implies he's still feeling all of this as his eyes turn red from all the internal hemorrhaging going on, all before his body bloats and contorts before exploding in a bloody shower of ants. Everything about this death is fucking fantastic! The hand-drawn visuals, Adam's haunting screams, the sound design of the ants tearing through and out of him, and even the music suddenly picking up in a dramatic crescendo that feels like it's straight out of a horror movie. There are very few deaths in death battle history that make me squirm even on repeat watches, and this is easily one of the best in that regard. It makes so much sense that Zack was basically working on this one scene from start to finish. What a way to wrap up an already excellent fight. Oh, and the conclusion is good too, I guess. I already touched on how they don't focus on stats at all, but it's convincing enough even with all that aside. And the end cutaway was a good payoff to the pizza science bit, especially since the inevitable Thanos joke was used to actively make Wiz look stupid instead of just being an unfunny reference shoved in elsewhere. Also, he wanna be Broomstick so bad, it's insane. So yeah, that was Ant-Man vs. Adam. Great analyses and a super entertaining, well-animated battle with only a small amount of jank to be found. Overall, a wonderful premiere that has me really optimistic about the outlook of Season 10 if they're all as good as this one was. And considering this was a basic Marvel vs. DC match that I don't think anyone was really expecting much from, I think the more creative episodes in this season's lineup have very little to worry about. I'd give it a very solid 8 out of 10. Bordering on a 9 if the few small criticisms I mentioned were to be remedied. Speaking of this season's more creative episodes, next time is The Chosen Undead vs. the Dragonborn. Wait, no. Dark Souls vs. Skyrim, I guess? I'm glad we're getting one we already knew was coming so soon. It leaves the rest of the episode lineup as surprises outside of Bill Cord and Colex. I know very little about Dark Souls and Skyrim in both contemporary and versus senses, so I'm looking forward to learning about them from this one. The selfish part of me is kind of hoping that it's handled by the same team who did Sauron vs. Lich King, but I don't want to set the bar too high. That one was really great, and I'm sure this one will be great in its own respects as well. And that's my first review of Season 10 done. Fans of Biff's reviews are probably accustomed to seeing a group reaction to the episode at this point in the video, but I was all on my lonesome when this episode went up for YouTube members, so I didn't have a group of friends to watch this one with. I did record my first watch of it though, but since it's kind of basic and boring when it's just myself, I'll be posting it as an unlisted video, which you can find linked in the description. Feel free to check it out if you want to hear me actively lose it over the death, and also the rest of the episode, I guess. But that aside, see you soon for the next review, and thank you for watching.